You're listening to On the Margins with me, Dan O'Sullivan.
And me, Eamon Stack-Mulvihill.
In this podcast, we will examine sites of education which are off the beaten track. Non-traditional, non-typical, but diverse and exceptional. Looking at learners who are often marginalised and ignored. So we're delighted to be joined today by Lee Keylock. Lee is the Director of Global Programmes with Narrative 4. Lee, you're very welcome to On the Margins. I suppose maybe to start off, we could ask you a little bit about your background, how you ended up in the States, and then maybe how you ended up working with N4.
Well, thanks for having me, gents. It's my pleasure to be here. Wow, how much time do you have, Dan? That's a long story.
We're looking at about 45 minutes, but a few minutes either way doesn't matter. So I suppose we can tell by your accent you're you're not an American, you're an Englishman.
That's right, yeah. Originally, although over here most people ask if I'm Australian at this point. I think my accent's morphed.
It has a little bit, yeah. You do sound a little bit Australian.
Yeah. No, but originally born in England. I was born in Malden in Essex, which is sort of London overspill, I guess you can classify it as that now. And yeah, I typical English upbringing, sort of working class neighborhoods, always looking to sort of break out from the norm and go visit France, Spain when you're a kid, you can hop on a ferry or a train or something. So I was always bitten by the travel bug, even at an early age, So I think that was my initial sort of interest in people and stories and new culture, food, music, whatever, like as a kid, just that rite of passage. I backpacked for a couple of years, actually, around Europe. And then before I came to the US, so that was sort of my primer was bumming around Europe, working on fruit farms, vineyards, sweeping decks of boats in the south of France, whatever you could do to make some money and put some bread and wine on the table, right? And and then I came to the US and tried to do the same thing, sort of worked a bunch of jobs and sort of, I fell into Narrative 4 many, many years later. It certainly wasn't on my to-do list.
Was it 1989 that you moved to the US?
Yeah, 1989, yep.
So you were doing the same kind of thing, living by the seat of your pants, just getting to see as much of the place as you can, I suppose, doing a bit of traveling, and that lovely kind of lifestyle you have before your life gets too serious. But then it did get serious, and you started a career in teaching?
Is
that what happened?
It's so funny because when I talk to some of my mates back home now, they can't believe that I ever became a teacher, public school teacher, because I was not a model student back in the day. I mean, maybe you can testify, I don't know, but back when I was in school in England, it was definitely corporal punishment, and they used to beat the teaching into you, or out of you, whatever you want to, whichever way you look at it. And I was never really interested in learning, at least in that structure. And then I came to the US and I decided, I actually worked in a nightclub for a few years. I worked for Peter Stringfellow, who was a real interesting guy. He died a few years ago, but he was quite the club entrepreneur. And so a lot of my learning happened in clubs and bars, but then I knew that wasn't sustainable. So I went to college. I actually went to college in the US and I decided I met, there were a couple of teachers that were these amazing English teachers, and I was very inspired by them. And I was like, that's the way teaching should be. And I just sort of fell into the rhythm of, that's what I want to do. I want to sort of be that sort of teacher, that sort of Dead Poets Society. At least in my dreamy mind, that was what it was like. And
have you stood on a desk? Have you stood on a desk in a class?
What's that?
Have you stood up on a desk in a classroom?
Yeah, of course. Of course. I got rid of the desks in some of my classrooms. We would sit on the floor. We would sit everywhere. We'd go outside. We'd go into nature. If I was teaching, I actually got to teach a lot of American lit, and I studied the American Romantics, and they were sort of very civilly disobedient. They always appealed to me. And I would take the kids outside, and I would tell them that phones left in the classroom. We're going out with a pencil and a sandwich, and we're going out to the woods for 2 hours, and we would sit and journal. And yeah, you would get kids turning up their nose, but then they would fall into it. And I still get written by students now, and they're like, "Oh my God, thanks. I was an arse during that time, but I really appreciate those lessons now, in life." So
you definitely managed to channel Robin Williams to a certain extent.
Yeah, I guess. Although some students might have a different opinion about that. You never know.
I suppose on that, Lee, you went, I suppose, from your travelling days to nightclub management and then into teaching. And from what I know, you taught in Connecticut anyway. Was there might have been other schools you taught in beforehand, but was Connecticut as a place being not rural, but it's definitely a little bit away from the city, New York City, and being out in the countryside there. Would that have been something that was, I suppose, a formative experience for you in teaching in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's, the city is different, right? It's usually a lot more diverse. The classrooms are a lot smaller, more packed with students than what they are in the suburban sort of areas. Newtown, where I actually taught, it's like a sort of rural-ish area. You're only a few minutes away from a major city in Danbury, or a major place. So it was pretty eclectic, but but yeah, it was yellow school buses, squirrels on the sidewalks, kids walking to school, backpacks. It was that sort of an environment, and it was really iconic. It was beautiful, and the kids were great. I would say it was sort of if you're looking at it, middle class, that sort of range. And but it was a great teaching gig. I was there for almost 13 years. And in our town, Sandy Hook, which most people who know anything about my history know that we had Sandy Hook was where one of the worst horrors of our time, right? In gun violence happened, and there were 26 people killed in under 4 minutes in our school system, and that was in the elementary school down the street from the high school. I taught in the high school, high school English, and that was a devastating time. Still is for our town. There's still we're still healing from that, right? That community is still very much healing. In fact, the kids that actually survived the elementary shooting were they actually graduated last year from the high school, so that will give you some sense of time. It's been 11 years.
And I suppose you kind of painted an almost picturesque version of a white picket fence, middle class town, and it's kind of very peaceful place that you'd imagine would be a lovely place to live, and then this tragedy is suddenly shattered. Or this idyllic scene is suddenly shattered by this awful tragedy, and I suppose that has devastating effects not only for the people involved, but and the wider community as a whole, as they kind of try to struggle to understand what has happened and how it has happened. The kind of response and the work with Narrative 4, I suppose, is kind of some way of responding to that tragedy. Could you speak on that a little bit, Lee, or am I pushing you in the wrong direction?
Yeah. No, you're fine. You're fine. It's one of those things in hindsight, right? And it's been 11 years, so I can look back now and be like, oh, I can sort of connect some of the dots along the way now, which I couldn't do at the time. But I know that teachers, I find teachers to be the sort of, I was talking about the romantics in lit. They're the eternal romantics. They're the optimists, right? They show up every day with these bags, and they want to teach kids, and they want to inspire kids to be the best version of themselves, right? And it's a tough gig, right? Teaching is a tough gig, but they know how to be in the trenches even when everything is quote unquote normal, right? So when a tragedy like that happens, my colleagues and myself, we sort of got very creative about how do we help kids heal, and we put the kids before even ourselves, right? And we don't. It's like the oxygen on an airplane. You're supposed to put your own oxygen tank on first, right? Otherwise, you can't help somebody else. But that's not what teachers do. Teachers always try to help others first. And So our students we decided to, just create an environment that was sort of safe for them, both physically and psychologically at the time, which was tough. We let them, for example, the first month after when we came back to school, we let students go to any class. We didn't have bells. We never rang the bells for classroom. Kids could go to the teachers they gravitated or felt closest with. So, we sort of rewrite the rules as you go. And one of the things that, we even had, service dogs all around the school for the kids just to pet. Like, that's something I would never have thought of, but somebody thought of that. And that was actually one of the most healing things I've ever seen, were these service dogs running around the hallways and just getting petted by, you're talking about teenagers, right? Sort of 15 to 18-year-olds. It was amazing. And so people got creative in their response, because there is no blueprint. When structures fall apart, right, you actually have a license to rethink everything in education even, right? And what works, what doesn't work. So one of the things that I did, somebody handed me a book by your famous Irish writer, Colin McCann.
Yeah.
It was Let the Great World Spin. And actually, it was very interesting. On Sunday night, I had dinner with Colin at his house, and Philippe Petit, who was the French tightrope walker, who is actually in the opening of that novel, which is really what turned me on to that book in the first place. This idea that you're on a wire across, and you're on this precipice the whole time. That really appealed to me at the time when I was reading the book in the wake of the shootings. And I met Philippe Petit for the first time on Sunday night. So I was very inspired by him and his sort of attitude towards life. And I think that's what appealed to me in this book, that you have to constantly be sort of recreating things. So anyway, I wrote to the publisher, and I wanted exactly 68 copies of this book for my students, because I thought that it would help with the healing. I'd never heard of Colin. I'd never read Colin before, but there was something about this book that instilled a sense of hope, and real hard fought hope, not that cliche Disney sort of hope. It was about, you have to be in the muck sometimes, but, like Oscar Wilde used to say, right, as long as you're staring at the stars, you can be in the gutter, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And that's what it was. So they sent me the books, and the letter got forwarded to Colin, and Colin reached out to me, and we met. And as they say, the rest is sort of history,
Yeah. Just to, I suppose, fill listeners in there on the book itself. So it's called Let the Great World Spin, and it's by Colin McCann, as we said. The book itself is about an artist who moves to this New York, if I'm right. In the start of the artist, they witness a hit and run, and it kind of sends the main character's life and career spinning sideways. And if I'm right, the way that you and your teaching, Lee, you used that book and you used it in your classroom as a way to navigate like grief of older students. Would that be right, or grief of your students in the room?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's sort of polyphonic, that book, right? There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of interesting stories. It's not a easy read at times. There's a lot of sort of trauma and tragedy in that book, but there are moments of beauty, and that's what appealed to me. And we were stuck in this, Sandy Hook. Sadly, we don't have the luxury of not being defined by 12/14, which is the day that, the shootings happened. Most people, when they hear the phrase Sandy Hook, they immediately go to that. But we don't have the luxury of not being defined by a single narrative, but there are many more narratives that make up our town, right? And the people within that town. So that's why I like Colin's book, because it was sort of this polyphonic thing. And as long as you're seeking a tiny crack of light, even if it's coming through a door jam, you can, as long as you head to that can be enough sometimes. And that's why I wanted to use that book and say to the students, it's going to be a while, it's going to take time, but you have to find these moments of beauty amidst the sort of wreckage, and sadly, this is really a commentary on education too, right? So many of the books that we've taught over the years, at least in the American school system, they're tragedies, right? Everything's tragic. And we're like, we want to turn kids on to reading and we keep hitting them over the head with these really tough books. And yeah, they're great, the classics. I love them too, but like we've got to mix it up a little, and that's why that book.
Lee, I don't know if you're familiar with Peg Sayers, but that is one of the major criticisms that's always levied at the teaching of Irish in this country, is that the novel you have to do in Irish is Peg, and Peg lives on an island off the coast of Ireland, and it rains and there's misery and more misery stacked on top of misery. So I really do get what you're saying about hitting children up with misery on top of misery. And you spoke there a little bit about, this Disney kind of version of The Lion King is Hamlet, essentially. And there is the Disney kind of, overcoming adversity, and Disney is for kids, and they don't get down into the muck, and they don't get into the absolute trauma that an event like Sandy Hook can leave you with. And, I suppose it's not really Disney territory to have to confront that side of yourself and, be able to see the beauty again after something like that happens. And when you're talking about that little crack of light, I'm thinking of Leonard Cohen again, and I've not for the first time, but on this podcast, but he has that beautiful line, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. Yeah,
I love that.
And I think that narrative 4, maybe not so much narrative 4, but even your story, your own personal story, you talk so much about finding that light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I don't know, and I'm not, this is just my version of it, right? Like there are many narratives out there and you'd have to speak to a lot more people. I was, in the high school, not the elementary school, which is next door, right? I was not somebody who thankfully, I didn't lose a child, but I know friends of mine did. And I'm sure if you spoke to some of the others, it's much, much harder. There were marriages that fell apart, right? There were people that did not, the trauma of that and the coping mechanisms of that are very varied, and it's down to different individuals. But for me, I don't know, I just knuckled down and I just felt like, my students were in such pain, and myself included, and we have to navigate this somehow together. And I didn't know what the alternative was. That for me, the alternative of cynicism or not heading towards some sort of light is far more damaging, I think.
Yeah, and I suppose
so somehow
we've spoken a few times with some of our other guests, about things like narrative 4, restorative justice, and things that are designed to bring empathy into schools. They're often dismissed as kind of wishy-washy or maybe being soft or something like that. But you need to, in my opinion, you need to be able to kind of have some sort of way of navigating that emotional space, because if you neglect it, it's going to bubble up somewhere else. And we can say that, as in our own lives. But, you said earlier the teachers put themselves first. Now, I often say to my students who are studying to be teachers, you need to avoid the temptation of doing that sometimes, because you can burn out. But you have to be able to navigate that space and be brave and be able to talk about or have some mechanism, whether it's narrative 4 or some other way of navigating the emotional space with students. Because if you're just ignoring trauma and sticking very much to the bell, the timetable and all that kind of stuff, and you're a skid mark at 3 when the bell goes and you're gone, and you're not really entering that space with students, you're really letting them down, and you'll never be that inspiring my captain Robin Williams type. And in that you're losing something yourself.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, for me, all learning is social and emotional, right? Mm-hmm. If you do not cater to that part first, those kids that show up in the classroom every day, right? You might be facing 30 students in a US classroom, or 25 kids. Those kids spend almost an entire academic year. They're with you more than they are with their parents or their siblings. They are with you in that classroom, right? And if you don't strike up, my philosophy is, if you don't strike up a human connection with every one of those children in that class, and they have to do that with you too, and they don't just see you as some caricature teacher, like, it's a disaster, right? If you can nurture that part first, then all of the academics will come. Then kids are more inclined to, if they feel seen, heard, loved, trusted, safe, they're going to learn. In that, if they don't have that, there's no amount of learning that can take place. And I know that from working with kids in gangs who go to school. One of my best friends, Warren Hardy, he said he went to school because it was safer than his home. But none of the teachers knew that. But he said, I wasn't learning. I wasn't ready to receive any of the lessons in my class. I just needed to be safe first. That's it. So I feel like that you have to get to know students personally and know something about their life before you can impart any kind of knowledge that we're trying to do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I suppose a lot of teachers don't want to do that. And traditionally, things are changing now, but traditionally in Ireland, that wouldn't have been seen as part of your role. Maybe it would have been to ensure that they were brought up in the right religious faith and that the education was done correctly and that they knew the things they were supposed to know at the end of the day. And I'm not saying for everyone, but the focus was on kind of morality, I suppose, over connection. And I suppose maybe religion occupied the place of that connection. For those who are maybe unfamiliar with Narrative 4, what I love about Narrative 4 is that it's such a simple methodology, but it can have really massive outcomes that resonate with people for years. Could you tell us a little bit about your approach, or why you think story exchange is so effective in building empathy?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, stories is, since the first cave painters, right, we're painting stuff on the walls. The people are telling stories, right? It was a means of survival for some point. We're sort of hardwired for it, right? I mean, you'd have to disseminate key information, like just to survive. This is where the food is. This is where the plants grow. This is where the water is. I don't know. Like, there are certain fundamental things that storytelling does, right? Mm-hmm. But also, it nurtures our sense of community and space. It's campfire stuff, right? It's when you sit around a campfire. And I think in the modern world, we've lost a little bit of that. We're the most connected generation ever, right? With phones and computers. And look at us, we're talking across the miles, right? On a computers. But we're the most disconnected at the same time. So I think it's really a throwback to something that's existed for generations. And like the shortest distance between two people is a story. I firmly believe that. When you know something personal about somebody, you're far more likely to lean in and get close and get curious. And I think that's what the magic of storytelling is in the classroom. And it's also a lot of fun. You can have a lot of fun with it. Not every story has to be a tragedy, right? You can talk about a first kiss, and you can talk about the time you fell off your bike. I don't know, like move to a new place. There are many stories that get told to build a through line. It's actually bridge building, mm-hmm. In my opinion.
So you're the director of global programs. So Narrative 4, we have James and Rachel here in Limerick, who recently met, or not that recently, but who met the Pope just before he died. So that's like the fact that they're invited to meet the Pope certainly shows that Narrative 4 is having a massive impact. Mm-hmm. But you're the director of global programs. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the Narrative 4 programs that are going on, around the world?
Yeah, I do. Just a word on the Pope, right? Rest in peace, Papa Francesco. We got to meet him in January, mm-hmm. and what an amazing time that was. But we were considered one of the organizations. There were about 120 people that were invited to meet him in the Vatican as part of the Jubilea. And we were considered communicators of hope. So the work that we do only communicates hope. We're not about anything else. So I just want to, highlight that. That's why we got recognized. And I love that. I'm proud of that, Mm-hmm. And so, but as far as the global work, yes, we work in, obviously Ireland. We're all over Ireland, right? And we work in, half the US, right? We're in schools in tons of the US states. We're in Palestine. We work in Israel. We work in Africa, all over Africa. There's Mexico. We have a big presence now in Latam, right? This idea of sort of Latin America. So we're growing. There's that which to me shows this conduit for people to share stories and the need for stories, right? Is that during the pandemic, for example, we sort of pivoted our story exchange program online, and we were jammed. People were jammed from all over the world. They wanted to understand the experience of other people during COVID-19 when we were all in lockdown. So there was this sort of desperate need to reach out, connect, and understand one another, And I do want to just say one other thing, that our story exchange, so it's not just about telling your own story. The sort of radical part, for at least in my opinion, is that you have to take on somebody else's story and tell theirs in the first person. And that brings you very close to the lived experience of somebody else. And that's where the magic happens, when you literally have to, with your partner next to you, kind of thing, you'll like retell their story and hold it like somebody's just handed you their child, and you're sort of taking care of it. So
definitely, yeah. Lee, as you mentioned there, it was ringing a bell for me. So something that I've thought about lately around the countries you mentioned, even when we're talking about Israel and Palestine, we also have Ukraine and Russia, and a lot of the time, and the discourse around that is, it's all going for people are on one side of the debate or the other, and they have an opinion on it. And we've really, I suppose, as a society, we've lost the opinion to almost engage in dialogue. And when we think about, I think, is it Schwarmer's levels of listening, people are really low down on that scale. And narrative 4 as a concept, it's all about raising ourselves up on that scale, so that we're not just listening or debating or coming back with statements. We're actually engaging in dialogue and taking in the information. And as you mentioned there, going from listening to retelling that story in the first person.
Yeah, it's all about deep listening and showing up with the intention to listen and sort of dethrone yourself for a minute and put somebody else there, right? That's and that intention, never underestimate the power of that intention to place somebody else there and give them a spotlight for a minute. And I think in schools and classrooms, that's what students, it's a volatile age, right? It's a very tumultuous age. I mean, I'm just speaking from my own experience. Like, emotions are raging. There's a lot of vanity, right? You're worried about peer pressure and how you look in front of groups. And but what a great time to teach the skills of listening and curiosity and imagination. That's where it's at for me.
You mentioned earlier that we're more connected than we've ever been before digitally. I mean, you're in the United States right now, and we're sitting here in Limerick and we're talking, and it's great. In another way, the technology is kind of alienating us from each other, and every thing we put out online is every post, every social media post, every little ping you get back, every like is kind of an acknowledgement that you exist. And I think as well, there's groups that would like to divide us politically, religiously, to suit their own purposes. And I think there's a lot of them that have really tuned into this social media as a space in which they can find trigger points and ways of dividing people. And even this kind of incel culture, they have ways of reaching or of finding each other. That wouldn't have been available in the past, but it's only available now because they can connect with each other online. Is there any way that you can think of kind of a way to counteract that in a digital space?
Well, we have to provide more opportunities to connect people, intentionally around things like story exchanges, right? Mm-hmm. And not this hit and run mentality where you can post something online and you don't have to worry about how it lands, when you've got somebody in front of you. And you get to, the other thing is you've got to linger in that space a bit. A lot of our methodology is about reflection after. So you have the catalyst experience of stories, right? Mm-hmm. Of story exchanges, but then you've got to linger and reflect as a group on that stuff. When we were at the Vatican, one of the keynote there were two keynote speeches, and I urge people to listen to them. One was with Colin McCann, and the other one was Maria Ressa, who is an incredible journalist. She's who runs something called Rattler, And, she's been targeted for her sort of journalism, but she got to work in the US with these big tech companies. She talks about how the algorithms are by design and how they're set. And she said hate and anger and fear, the emotions, those algorithms are set and they catch fire very quickly online. So, and that's what sort of, spreads sort of very quickly. She said, but ironically, what they don't tell you is inspiration has exactly the same algorithm, but there are not enough inspirational stories out there to counterbalance, that sort of negativity. So I feel like the more organizations like us that do that and post good stories. I listen to the BBC sometimes. They have happy news. They call it happy news. You just tune in and it's only happy news, which is not Pollyanna. It's just a sort of salve to all of the other stuff we're bombarded with daily. We all need to be sort of doing that.
Yeah, Machiavelli poses that question, is it better to be feared or loved? And I often kind of have to remind myself that when he poses that question, he's talking from the point of view of a medieval despot, essentially. The idea that kind of fear is a stronger motivator, and that anger, hate and fear, they do set the internet alight. But you are saying inspiration has the same algorithmic potential, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And putting out those stories of hope and finding the light, that's a good way of counteracting it. I'm minded that people now have listened to us talk about story exchange a little bit. Some people, they mightn't know what the hell we're talking about. Could you walk us through kind of what the story exchange model is? I know you're familiar that Eamon and I already know, but our listeners mightn't.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the essential premise is you bring a bunch of people to a space, right? And you pair people up, you give them a selection of prompts to choose from where they can select any story from their life. And you pair people up and they spend, sort of 20 minutes together and they exchange their stories. You listen, we teach about deep listening. You have to listen to understand, not to respond. Don't ask too many questions about the story. Don't derail somebody's story by asking questions. You can ask clarifying questions at the end. And then you bring, once that sort of pair share is complete, you bring them to the room where you all sit in a circle, right? And you sit next to your partner and then we go around the circle and it's facilitated. We have this incredible facilitator training that people can join so they can do this. I know Ireland is promoting a big, the Irish N4 through promoting the training right now. So, and you literally watch people tell their partner's story in the first person as if it's their own. And, the emotional, those spaces, right? And there has to be scaffolding. You can't just throw people into a room and say, tell stories. There has to be a little bit of scaffolding and stuff. And then you reflect on the experience afterwards, and inevitably what happens is people leave that room differently because they are much, much closer than when they first walked in. And you don't just, it's not just about 2 stories, right? You might be hearing another 10 stories or 20 stories. So through osmosis, you're listening and hearing the lived experiences of many people. And it's fantastic, that's the spirit. And I also would be remiss if I didn't say that we're an artist-founded organization, right? We have, Colin, who's the author. Sting has helped us with the musical arm. Colin McAnamara, who's an incredible, he used to be in the Frames, right, in Ireland. He's an incredible spokesperson and facilitator for Narrative 4. And so we try to use art as well. It's not just oral narrative. You could tell stories through art, through painting, through music, through dance. We have an incredible artist network that we're building also. And then there's the students, of course. We really want the students to sort of lead the charge. Once they get hooked, we want them to become facilitators. And that's twofold. One, because they have the agency to run these exchanges and get creative and they kind of love it. And the other part is to offload teachers who are buried in work. Yeah,
and a lot of the time, teachers are expected to do so much. you're the counsellor, you're the teacher, you're the social worker, you're the mammy, you're the daddy, and then you have to get somewhere to live in the middle of a housing crisis, relocate to where there's a teaching job going, and then you have to spend a huge amount of your own money on resources for your classes, which can be quite frustrating. And then you have the likes of me and Eamon coming along when you're a young teacher starting out doing your teacher training, and we're saying, no, you have to do something to build an emotional connection with each of your students, and it can be all a little overwhelming. So this methodology and this training is available for free. I think it's still available for free to teachers to student teachers, certainly. And it is something that you're going to want to have in your virtual school bag as a teacher when you walk into a classroom, and it will help. So a lot of the time, student teachers are afraid that they're going to walk into a classroom full of Che Guevaras. Have you ever walked into a classroom full of Che Guevaras, Lee, who are bent on overthrowing you? And when you can make this meaningful connection, you're not putting out fires all the time. You're not dealing with rebellion, and you're in a more informed space. I suppose, like, if you know the little details about your students' lives, Auntie Mary is sick, Johnny supports Man United, David supports Kerry, and Kerry won the All-Ireland the weekend, and the story exchange is a great way to be present and to build these connections, and they do make it easier for your teaching, and the relationships not only between you and your students will be better, the relationships between your students and each other will be better too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would underscore everything. I would highlight and underscore and check off everything you just said. It's, to me, I would tell any new student teacher that if you do not build that emotional sort of umbilical cord connection, whatever you want to call it, immediately in that classroom, then you are going to get a bunch of Che Guevaras, because kids, once they see you too, as the teachers, as a human being with a life and a lived life as well, right? They just warm up to that, and the learning and the teaching becomes easier when you do that. And to be honest, it's all about preparation. Like, if I think about, Newtown, going back to Newtown, well, there are many amazing teachers in that school. And the reason we were able to navigate one of the worst horrors in history is because we had built a foundation of emotional intelligence and connection with our students. And I'm not saying every teacher, but the majority of teachers in that school were paid homage to that philosophy, right? And we were prepared in any way that you could be prepared for something like that. We were more prepared. If you don't have that foundation, it's disastrous, right? So why don't we just practice it every day? Like, this idea of empathy and connection. It's just counterintuitive to not do that.
Yeah, and I think the practice, whether you do it by story exchange every day, or even if it's every day or once a week, but creating a space in which you're doing something to keep a connection, or, it is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. I want to kind of turn a little bit, Lee, I suppose, if I can, because we're getting near the end of the time, and I don't want to take up your whole day, and we are very grateful to you for speaking to us. Mm-hmm. But
my pleasure.
Just on the subject of violence in schools and gun violence, I was listening to one of your compatriots, John Oliver, there, and he was talking about school police officers, and it seems insane to me from an Irish point of view that you'd have police officers in schools, like the police have to go into schools to deal with something, or normally it's something fairly innocuous, but it'd be a rarity. Sometimes they go in, but to have police officers permanently assigned to a school just seems bananas from our point of view. But the culture is a little different in the US, and I know you do a lot of work in terms of the reform of gun laws in the United States as well. So if you wanted to touch briefly on that, Lee.
Yeah. One of the programs we did in the South Bronx, look, America is a gun nation, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not even going to get into the politics of that. But I can tell you in my opinion, this is just one guy, one of the big failures in this country is that people have lost the ability. Eamon, you were talking about dialogue earlier. There is no dialogue happening. There's monologue, and people are standing on. They have their, their sound bites and their arguments ready to rock and roll. Right, as soon as somebody says something counter. But what we try to do, even on the Hill, when I went to DC after Sandy Hook, we tried to tell stories. We sat with politicians. We told them about the impact on our lives, and and how this and even that didn't move the needle, right, on the Hill. So instead of, but we also need to present a more holistic picture of guns in the US. It's not just a bunch of people running around gun toting. Like if you're in Montana, you need a gun, right? Because you're living amongst grizzly bears, whatever. If you're in Kentucky, you need a gun because you want to put rabbit on the table. Like there are reasons to have guns as well. And protection, right? People feel like they need it for protection. And so in schools, what we do, instead of aiming for the Hill all the time in DC and trying to manipulate the politicians who are often mired in their political, party, we try to work in schools and communities with the police, with youth, and try and improve those community relations as a preemptive thing so that gun violence is far less likely to occur. So in the South Bronx, we had students that would actually do story exchanges with the police officers in their school and their precincts. And their precinct actually in the South Bronx is one of the highest crime rates in the entire US. And I can tell you this, when the police came in, and it's interesting because in New York, they wear their uniforms with the guns during the story exchange. So you actually have weapons on people. And the teachers thought that was really important for kids to see them as human beings, even in their full regalia, right? As in Baltimore, when we did it, they did not want the guns in the, on the police force. They had to wear sort of more civilian clothes. So there's different, there's not one mold fits all. But the essential premise was that kids and cops saw each other as human beings. And I can tell you that the police were more nervous to tell stories than the kids were. But I will leave you with one funny story. There was a police officer and a kid that were paired, and they did a story exchange. And the young kid told a story about when he escaped from a fire escape. He had a curfew, and his parents, and he went down the fire escape 10 o'clock at night to meet his mates and hang out, right? And he came back a minute, but he got caught anyway. And then at the end, the police officer had to tell his story, right? But then during the reflection at the end, we were sort of getting meta with all the stories. And the officer said, look, dude, he's like, I could tell you exactly why you got caught. He's like, you left this trail behind you. You left this evidence, You got to not do that in future, and blah, blah, blah. And it was just this beautiful human moment of a cop trying to tell a kid how not to get caught, And hopefully those relationships have changed. The police see these youth as these vibrant young kids, and vice versa. The kids see these cops as human in their interactions, and that will improve gun violence, hopefully. But how do you even, quantify that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you hit upon something there as well that's very interesting. You said that the armed cops were afraid of the students. So I think that brilliantly kind of makes it clear how daunting it is for a student teacher to walk into a classroom for the first time.
Yeah.
So on that, Lee, we are really appreciative of your time. The work you're doing is extremely important. I am delighted that it has a global focus now, and that the movement is spreading, because there's just so much out there that's trying to divide us, have groups dehumanize each other. And I know even students and teachers can dehumanize each other sometimes as well. This is a really simple methodology that can be adapted to so many different scenarios, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. So if there's school leaders out there listening, student teachers, or community groups, get involved with Narrative 4. You can, if you just Google Narrative 4, you get it. If you're based in Limerick, you can get onto Narrative 4. They have an office in O'Connell Street in Limerick. And Lee, just to say thank you so very much. And if there's anything you'd like to add or anything I haven't asked you, speak now.
No, just you know what? Hopefully, when you post the episode or whatever, you can we can give you some links.
Absolutely.
You know, narrative4.ie is the Irish website where you can get all the information you need about what's happening and the trainings. And we also have a program in the US right now called N4NSN, National Schools Network, which we're accepting applications, which is a fully funded 3-month sort of training program where we connect teachers across the country, the continent. And so there's plenty of information. Just go to the website, you can post it. And then the last thing I'll say is, stories are a lot of fun. They can be extremely joyful in the classroom. And my Lord, we need some joy in the classrooms too, alongside all of the other stuff that we're teaching, So I urge people to break the algorithm and just connect,
Yeah, I think that's a great way to finish. Lee, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of On the Margins.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow and subscribe on all your usual platforms or wherever you get your podcasts.
You can also check us out on our website, aidonthemargins.com, for more info, content, and upcoming events. See you soon.